This is kind of a wrap-up video, but there is one big problem we still have to solve when we start combining some of these files together. I want to take a look and show you what I have done. I have combined my metadata access operations and my config access operations, which is in fact what you need to do for the first assignment. In the main function, I've done the very same thing. I have a config file upload, and then I do some work here and I get the metadata file upload. I have to incorporate both of these, and this is going to be key to the problem we need to solve in just a moment. I want to point out that my config 0 has the file name metadata0.mdf in it. That will be used by this program, and that is the file that we were using previously. So back to my main, I have these two files incorporated as H files. I have these files all together in the make file. Let's take a look at what happens when we compile it. Here's my make file temp, and this goes nuts. And there's a reason for this. It says redeclaration of this when it was already declared here. And it's saying it from the same thing. Hey, look, when I try to compile this, I'm getting the same thing I did when I compiled this. And then same here, redeclaration of enumerator true. Hey man, I got this when I tried to compile here, but I already had it when it compiled here. What's going on here? It's compiling, or at least it's trying to compile this twice. And that is in fact the problem. So let's go ahead and look at what we have to do to resolve this. What has to happen when you do H files, and you should always do this even if it's not necessary. I held it off in the programming up to this point because I wanted to point out the error and how to solve it. So what should always happen in header files, at least header files, sometimes this is also used in C files as well, is I'm going to say pre-compiler directive. And what I'm going to say is pound if and def. This is asking a question, and it's asking it at the compiler level, not the programming level. This is a different set of code. But if it's not defined, and then you put it in here, usually in the form of capital letters, I'm going to say string utils H. So if it's not defined to the compiler, I'm going to define it. So this only happens once. After this, it'll always be defined and the compiler is going to ignore it. I'm going to go to the end of the file, and down here at the end, I'm going to put pound end if. And again, this is compiler talk, not C language. And I always add in there the name of what we're ending up. String utils H. That's not necessary, but that's what I put in there. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to do the same thing to my other H files. Pre-compiler directive, ask the compiler if this is not defined, go ahead and define it. But if it is defined, skip all the way down to the end if and move along. This is a pre-compiler directive. These are used quite frequently for library files and for other files that are used in the C and other languages. I will go ahead and do this with my metadata access.h. Again, I ask if it's not defined, now define it, and now compile it. Hereafter, if you ever come back to this again, it'll be defined, don't compile it anymore. And again, it will compile it all the way down to the end of the file here, to the end if, and then sometimes there are files where you do an end if and then you do another pre-compiler directive. It gets fancy and messy pretty fast. So now we'll go ahead and save this. Both of these config access and metadata access files may not have needed this. The string utils definitely needed it. However, it's just a good idea to do this with every H file that you create. Let's go ahead and take a look at our compiler now, and we have a happy compiler. And we should be able to go ahead and run this. So let's do a / upload files. I will give it that config 0.cnf. And if I come up here, here is my config file display, and then here's my metadata file display, and we live happily ever after. With that in mind, we have solved the last problem. While this video is short, this was an important item to point out. You need to be able to see what happens when you start seeing things saying redeclared. But in any event, you should always use the protection of the pre-compiler directives for all of your H files at least. You're welcome to do it with C files as well. There are some cases where that matters, but not in ours. So that will finish up this video series.